This episode of What's Going On with Shipping is global shipping heading to a recession. I'm your host, Adam Coglano. Welcome to this episode of What's Going On with Shipping. If you're new to the channel, take a moment, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell so you'll be alerted about new videos as they come out. And if you can, support us via Patreon. So I read a couple of articles this week that had me going, and I needed to take a moment to come back and discuss them. So there were two in particular, one by Craig Fuller, the CEO of FreightWaves, who wrote a piece entitled "Why I Believe a Freight Recession is Imminent." And then another one also on FreightWaves, this one by Greg Miller, "Container Shipping at the Crossroads, the Big Unwind or Party On." So let me be clear first. I am a former merchant mariner, a maritime historian. I am not an economist, although my undergraduate is in business and specifically marine transportation. So don't take anything I'm going to say for gospel for what's going to happen in the future. But I think we're at a very interesting point here. So when I started this channel a little over a year ago now, one of the things that I was commenting on was Ever Given, but when Ever Given got free, I started talking about the shipping industry. And over time, I did more of that. I've been teaching a course since 2008 for the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy on maritime industry policy. So it's a graduate level course, and I get to work with a lot of people in the industry. And obviously, this channel, my presentations, and everything else I do gives me a lot of insight into the industry. I get to observe it for quite a bit and study it. Plus, working with G Captain and FreightWaves and a few other organizations gives me that opportunity. So I want to take Craig's article, Greg's article, and then a few other pieces and discuss that issue. Is global maritime trade, particularly container shipping, coming into a recession, or is the party still on? So let's go ahead and break down this argument. So this is the piece that Craig published on March 31st. And he goes on here to talk about this issue. And one of the things he talked about is the similarity to the situation that trucking faced in 2019 and how he was able to predict that the recession for 2019 was coming in toward freight. But I really want to come over here to this section and talk a little bit about what he has. So he started talking about this. So first off, different opinions and disagreements are part of a healthy market. When I started FreightWaves in 2017, the goal was to create transparency in the freight market, much like you see in financial markets. If you don't follow FreightWaves or you don't watch FreightWaves TV, one of the things they always talk about is becoming the Bloomberg of freight, which I think is really an accurate depiction for what Craig wants FreightWaves to be. And let me be clear, I've never met Craig Fuller. I've conversed with him on Twitter. That's about the extent of our communications. And I've been invited on FreightWaves as a non-paid just commentator. So I'm not plugging FreightWaves here in any way. So this is the section I really wanted to highlight right here. The problem is that capacity expansion always continues well past the peak and can even continue for a time after the market has entered a recession. In the bloodbath of 2019, the peak of the market took place during the second quarter of 2018. However, it was not until September 2019 that a number of new entrants into the trucking market peaked. Basically, what Craig has come up with here is that this concept, everything is pointing to, just like it did back in 2019, that we're looking at a freight recession. Now, understand that's not an economic recession. We're talking about a freight recession. So the amount of cargo being shipped is going to change. Then let's go look at Greg Miller's piece. So Greg is another one of these reporters for FreightWaves. I haven't met Greg. I didn't even talk to Greg. I've just communicated with him via Twitter and I think email. But we've never spoke in person. And he put this piece up here the other day: container shipping at the crossroads, the big unwind or party on. Some indexes show falling trans-Pacific rates, but signals still mixed. And so what I want to do is really break down Greg's article, because I think it really hits on some of the key points right here. So first off, his introduction. Is faltering consumer demand curbing imports, allowing port congestion to finally ease, releasing container ship capacity, and causing ocean spot rates to sink? Is this the beginning of the big unwind? Or does waning West Coast port congestion stem from temporarily lower exports out of China due to COVID lockdowns combined with a congestion shift toward East Coast ports? Is the economy still strong and ocean freight rates still fundamentally firm with such port crunch to worsen in the second half, pushing spot rates higher? The problem is you can you can still tell plausible stories in each direction. And I agree. So he talked to Phil Levy, economist at Flexport. We keep looking for all the signals to light up one way or for something irrefutable to happen, but these continue to be strong signals on both sides. So in other words, everything is flashing on both sides that things are going to stay strong or they're going to slow down. We just don't know. So let's look at what Greg looked at and take a look at this in more detail. So he looks at the Trans-Pacific spot rates. So there are long-term rates and spot rates. A long-term rate is something you book long in advance and you commit tonnage to it, and you tend to get lower rates. Spot rate is, okay, I need it right now. It's the last minute bookings. It's kind of fill in, and it goes up and down. And what you'll see here is the east, the kind of the Asia to East Coast and Asia to West Coast. And you'll see how Asia to East Coast spot rate has been higher and still remains higher. Then you get this little divergence here where they kind of split. And he goes on to talk about this in some more detail. They look at all the different indices that are there. I'll pull up the Freight Waves Index right here. Let me get my mug out of the way so you can see this. And you'll see right here, the Asia to East Coast rates since February have increased. The Asia to West Coast rates have increased and then decreased. The East Coast to Europe is up. The Europe to the East Coast to Europe is also slightly up, but then the global index is just slightly down. And so what we're seeing here is kind of a mix really in the freight rates. So not exactly a clear identification of what's going on. Freight rates have not precipitously dropped. The spot rates are down, but again, the long-term rates are still kind of hanging in there. So next, he looks at the issue of port congestion, and specifically the ports of LA and Long Beach. Now, this has been the measure for what's been going on with shipping since, the very beginning here. And you'll see in blue the 2021 rates and then the 2022 rates. Now, this is adjusted for the fact that LA sent the ships off to sea back in November, and we're not taking that into account. Basically, if the ships were sent back out to sea, they're still counted here. And you'll see how the rates absolutely just kind of peaked back in November. They did it again early in January, and now they've fallen. And if you look at LA's numbers, and this is the latest from the Marine Exchange of Southern California, you'll see how these numbers have gone. Back in November, when they really started kind of tracking this, when they started moving the ships out of the area, you'll see the number of ships right here. You'll see how it peaked back in January with 101 ships, the record high. Then it dropped, and you'll notice it got down into the 30s in March, and then it peaked back up, and now we're back down to this level of 39. And if you look at it graphed out, this is what you see. The gray line here represents all the ships waiting to get in, and then you have that shift where the ships move off area around LA. They basically go down to Mexico and sit. So those are the ships that are basically now being held off the area, but you still have a total number. And this number right here they're showing is a backup of 44 ships. They're showing that backup of 44 ships, and this is as of I think 8 April. So this is the yesterday's. But remember, this number right here is still as high as it's been for a long time. Everybody wants to sit there and say, okay, we're down to 44 ships from a peak of 109. So what is that? 60% drop. That's an impressive drop. If you drop 60% all of a sudden, that's significant. You've fallen 60%. The problem is, it's 4,000% higher than it was pre-COVID. So yeah, we've fallen a lot, but we still have a lot of ships waiting off at the anchorage. And the problem here is other metrics that are at play beyond just the number of ships waiting to get into LA and Long Beach. The other elements regarding LA is, of course, the fact that LA, Long Beach are still experiencing issues with delays. So this is the latest report by the Port of LA on their import container dwell times. Understand, fourth quarter of last year and into the first quarter of this year, LA and Long Beach slowed down the number of containers coming in. And that's because they were trying to clear the backlog. So if you look back when this measurement was started back in October, you'll see that they had basically indwelling, that this is the number of containers sitting in the port waiting to be moved. They were between 90 and 100,000 containers. Well, they got down low here by February, and they were clearing them out quite a bit. But what we see here is this spike, this kind of squirrel heartbeat here is increasing. And now they're at 37%. So they've only reduced the number of containers dwelling in the port by 37% total. They've done a good job in reducing the long term, the 9+ days, down 50%. But you still have this issue with nearly 60,000 containers sitting in the port of LA and Long Beach, or this is just LA, but not Long Beach, but Long Beach is similar, but this is just LA. But you can see that when you look at empties, kind of the same thing here. LA has been swamped with these empties trying to get them out. They had a peak of empties was hit back in December. They were over at 90,000 empties at that point. They're down to 60,000 empties. But again, the overall change here just represents 10% since November 15. So they still have massive backlogs in the port in terms of fully loaded imported containers and empty containers that need to get out. Now, remember, we have a whole issue here with exports I'm not even going to get into. But that is the big issue that's looming with the port of LA, and the same can be extrapolated for Long Beach. So next, Greg talks about the fact that waiting off port limits TEU capacity east versus West Coast. So one of the stories that popped from Bloomberg this week was how the shift has taken place. There are now more TEUs at anchor off East Coast ports than West Coast ports. So this is the Bloomberg article right here. And in particularly, they focused at a series of tweets done by Marine Traffic, always the good crew at Marine Traffic. And when you look at this, they show a new trend shaping up with more waiting TEU capacity stuck outside the East Coast and the West Coast. As of today, when they posted this on April 6th, 609,000 waiting TEU capacity was bound for the U.S. Of these, 186,000 are off the West Coast and 273,000 off the East Coast. And that is exactly true. Matter of fact, the port of Charleston, which has the largest backlog right now, had initially announced they had hoped to clear the backlog by mid-April. They have rescinded that since then, and it's not exactly clear when that backlog is going to shift. And this all has to do with a couple of issues. One of the things that we've been seeing since the backlog took place at LA and Long Beach, shippers, those who haul the cargo, those who are paying, they're the beneficial cargo owners, they're the ones who are paying the ocean carriers to haul their cargo, have been shifting their cargo onto Neo-Panamax ships, very similar to Everforward aground in the Chesapeake, to go through the Panama Canal and come to East Coast ports and bypass LA and Long Beach, because LA and Long Beach was just taking too long. They're willing to take the longer sea voyage. They're willing to pay a little bit more because they can get their cargo delivered more reliably, excuse me. And that's what we're seeing. We're seeing this shift take place. And so right now, the East Coast and Gulf Coast are seeing more traffic than the West Coast is seeing. And this means that you can't just measure the delay off LA and Long Beach, which I would argue is still substantial. Again, still come back to this chart right here, still 44 ships waiting off LA and Long Beach right now. That is still more than you've had going back to, late 2021, which when we looked at that and it hit 44, we were like, holy cow, 44 ships. It's still a lot. It's just not 109, but it's still a lot. And so this shift is very indicative, I think, of how freight is moving. And this may also be part of the element with trucking that Craig is looking at, because that long haul trucking out of LA and Long Beach may have decreased a little bit. And now it's more localized down to East and Gulf Coast ports. So I'm not sure. I'm not a trucking expert, but that's one of the issues I think that's also at play here. The other thing he talks about here is the share of ships waiting off US and Chinese ports. So great graph here. Blue represents the number of ships waiting off LA and Long Beach. Red is the number of ships waiting off East Coast ports. And then the gray here are ships off Shanghai and Ningbo. And again, another great story. This is over at G Captain, a Bloomberg story right here, discussing container pileup at Chinese ports as lockdown blocks trucks. Steve Farrar on FreightWaves on his B2B, his Friday afternoon show, talked about this quite a bit. We're seeing this impact, even though the port of Shanghai is not closed. Getting the trucks into the port and moving the cargo in is causing this. This story in particular talks about the Ocean Network Express said in a customer advisory on Wednesday, while the port is operating normally, there are a critically high number of refrigerated containers and items classified as dangerous goods piled up at 2 storage yards, meaning some ships carrying these types of cargo may not be able to unload any more boxes at the port. Shanghai, like many ports around the world, don't just pile boxes up in their terminal. They use satellite yards to move the containers to and kind of move them in. And this trucker shortage and the ability to move these containers from the terminals to the satellite yards is causing problems. And plus, there's huge ramifications right now in China about the lockdowns, the fact that people are going short of food and medicines, and it's just turning into a massive mess. So that goes back to this issue of conflicting signals that is talked about here by Greg. And Greg talks about some key things in here. So one of the first ones he talks about here is deciphering all these market signals has become increasingly complex. No kidding. I mean, this is, if I had a Ouija board, I get it out right now because I'm not exactly sure where we're going here. Congestion looks like it's falling, but it may just be shifting in other ports. And declines may reverse when Shanghai lockdowns end. U.S. consumer demand plays a role as well, but how much and how long remains unclear. Lars Jensen, CEO of Vespucci Maritime, wrote a commentary. This is it right here, and I'll, of course, include it in here, where he talks about this. And what Lars basically says in this is under the current lockdown, what they're using is a terminology entitled dynamic zero COVID. The reality is the city of 25 million remain under lockdown, and with that comes the closure of manufacturing plants, warehouses, and as well as an acute shortage of truck drivers in possession of the proper test certification to be allowed to drive. It is by now very clear this is reducing manufacturing output. But he goes on here, the very conclusion. In the very short term, this, of course, means that demand out of Shanghai is being reduced. This, in turn, means there will be more vessel space available for other ports in the region, and expectations should therefore be of downward pressure on freight rates. All of that comes to mean that we don't know what's happening with the freight rates, because every time we have these black swan events, and I keep saying these black swan events are supposed to be rare and not common, but we've got a flock of these black swans now, and we really need to get the flock out of here because it keeps upsetting and making it very hard to predict what's going to happen. Go on down here. The wild card might already be in play. Bank of America just downgraded 9 transportation stocks. Retailer Restoration Hardware recently confirmed a sudden drop in demand for its household goods. I have to say a couple of things about this because we all know about inflation. We know how costly things got. So I think Americans' disposable income is restricted right now due to inflation, due to higher costs. The variable here is how many of us are back to normal work routines, how many of us are flexing from work from home and from the office. I think a lot of not consumers, but producers, retailers, warehouses, everybody doesn't know what Americans want to buy yet. And they're hedging their bets. Who knows what this holiday season is going to be like? And so freight is still flowing into the United States with the expectation that we have to play both ends of the spectrum. And what happens, by the way, if a new variant comes out and we go back into lockdown again? And what this means is distribution centers and warehouses are getting jammed full with goods, but they're not coming out of the distribution centers and warehouses as fast. This is what Craig writes about, because Americans are kind of hedging a bit too on what they're ordering right now. They're getting by with what they need and maybe cutting back on some of the additional items. So I think some elements of this is really spot on. And this analysis goes on here. I want to kind of look at this because he goes back to the Flexport economist, Phil Levy. The trucking data is some of the most compelling I've seen, arguing for a slowdown, and there is a weakness for things like house furnishings, especially. These could be early warning signs. Prices are soaring. The labor market is incredibly tight. We all know it's so hard to get people to work right now. Inventory to sales ratios are still below pre-pandemic level, and many would argue due to just in case over just in time strategies. This is, again, are you going to fill your warehouses with goods so that when you hit that Amazon button, it arrives immediately? Or are you going to put delays in this? That you'd want that ratio higher than pre-pandemic. If I had to come down on one side, I think it does start to look like a slowdown, but there's a lot of uncertainty, and what's true in the freight market is true for the economy writ large. So my one caveat to all this is this slide right here from the Marine Exchange. This is the flood of ships heading our way for just the ports of LA and Long Beach. I know the port of LA and Long Beach are saying there are 44 ships waiting, but they only count the ships that have arrived within the 25-mile zone of LA and Long Beach and then go into holding. They don't factor all the ships that are from the center to the left side of the screen that are coming across in this wave. There is a tsunami of ships coming. These are the ships that got loaded and shipped out after the Chinese New Year, but prior to the shutdowns off Hong Kong and Shanghai. And so we've got this wave coming. This is not the number of ships heading for the Panama Canal either, that are going to come through the Panama Canal and come to the East and Gulf Coast ports. And I think this all indicates several things, and some of the things not mentioned in here that we really need to be talking about. ILWU contract renegotiation on the West Coast. That's not scheduled to start until May. And they need to come out with a contract renegotiation before it expires on June 30th. Now, I've been told repeatedly by the ILWU that no worries, even if we don't have a contract renegotiation, we're going to continue working as is. All right. Can you put that in writing? Can you come out in public and say that? Because right now, I think a lot of people are hedging their bets and putting loads that would ship in third and fourth quarter into second quarter ships right now. And that's going to jam up warehouses and distribution centers even more. I think we're also talking about the idea that there is a lot of tonnage available today that would not be normally available to haul cargo. The shipping companies are going to start bleeding some ships out of here fairly soon as buildups. If there is a slowdown in the amount of cargo coming across the ocean, we're not going to see that directly, because what they're going to do is ships that have been put back in service that normally would have been scrapped due to IMO 2020, the new fuel rules and everything else, is going to head to the scrapyard. And they're going to bleed their excess tonnage as quick as they can. And I think the big ocean carriers in particular are not going to sell that tonnage off to be bought up by some of these new operators that are on the Trans-Pacific, Trans-Europe route. I think they'd rather send them to scrap so that they can keep the capacity for themselves. We talk about those new players that are in there. We keep hearing, Gene Soroka will always talk about the fact that there are new players in service now, but they have a fraction of the capacity of the big nine in the three alliances. Again, 2M, the Ocean Alliance, and the Alliance are the big players in town. And they are going to squash these little guys when they have an opportunity to do it. It's what they did in the past. It's what they're going to do again. The new DOJ FMC investigations, Department of Justice and Federal Maritime Commission investigations, just subpoenaed Maersk lines. This creates a little bit of anxiety among the big shipping companies. The World Shipping Council has talked about this. They don't like the Ocean Shipping Reform Act that just got passed by the Senate, and now the House and Senate have two different versions. They need to come together. They don't like to be mandated to load exports in their boxes. Already talked about the fact they had 60,000 boxes sitting in LA that are largely empty coming out. They don't want to be told to put exports in, but they may be told to, especially with Russia-Ukraine war, the fact that the Black Sea is closing the shipping because of mines and increased insurance rates. That means wheat and grain shipments coming out of there, oil and other commodities are going to start spiking. So I guess what I'm saying in this is, I know I haven't been clear, and I apologize, because it's not a clear situation. There's no crystal ball here that tells us which way the freight market is going. I firmly believe Craig is right about the trucking recession coming full force. The question is shipping lagging behind, or is shipping the true indicator for what's going to happen here? Because right now in the shipping firms, we're still seeing things moving. You still have backlogs at ports. You still have freight coming. And more importantly, they're loading stuff. If we were in this recession, we would see the slowdown coming out of Asia right now. We don't see that. What we're seeing in the slowdown coming out of Asia is due to COVID lockdowns, not due to demands. And it looks like the major cargo, the beneficial cargo owners are still ordering cargo at still high levels to go in. And this means that we're going to see now that cargo may wind up in distribution centers and warehouses, not going out to consumers. That may be true. But again, things, inflation has hit, but what's the impact of that inflation on the consumers right now? Plus, you have the variable of the Biden administration. What do they do? How do they handle inflation? Are they going to play with interest rates? Are we going to see money get back into the hands of consumers through tax reliefs, through some sort of incentive program? Who knows? Who knows? But right now, at least from the shipping perspective, container ships and cargo is still flowing at record levels. You look at the profit reports from the big container lines, they're still at record levels. Yes, we've seen stock fall in some of the traded companies like Zim, for example. Zim has taken a big fall, but Zim did this too earlier and then popped right back up. So it's not exactly clear what's happening here. So a little bit of a longer video, I apologize, but it's a very complex issue. So I hope you enjoyed the video. I know it probably wasn't 100% clear, and I apologize, but this is the complexity of ocean shipping. If you enjoyed it, please take a moment, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell so you be alerted about new videos when they come out. Give it a thumbs up, leave a comment, and if you can, support the page through our Patreon channel. So until our next video, I'm Sal, signing off.